The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Eleanor James ducked behind a water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs. This wasn't how she'd imagined her arrival in the Montana Territory would unfold, with bullets flying and her carefully packed trunk abandoned in the middle of the street. But then again, nothing in her life had gone according to plan since her father's passing. "Stay down, miss," a deep voice commanded from somewhere to her right. Eleanor pressed herself against the weathered wood, her dove-gray traveling dress already soiled with dust and grime. The sound of hooves thundered past, followed by more gunfire. She squeezed her eyes shut, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake in coming west. The year was 1878, and at 22, Eleanor had exhausted her options in Boston. When her father's law partner had presented her with an opportunity to teach school in Montana Territory, she'd seized it despite her aunt's vehement protests. Now, cowering behind a water trough while outlaws and lawmen exchanged fire, she was beginning to think Aunt Harriet might have been right. "It's safe now, madam." The same deep voice came closer, and Eleanor opened her eyes to find a tall figure blocking the sun. She looked up, squinting against the glare, and saw a man with a well-worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He extended a hand to help her up, and she noticed calluses on his palm as she accepted his assistance. "Thank you," she managed, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "I wasn't expecting such a lively welcome to Silver Creek." His mouth quirked into a half-smile beneath a neatly trimmed mustache. "The Callahan gang has been causing trouble for weeks. You picked an unfortunate day to arrive." He studied her with keen blue eyes. "You must be the new schoolteacher." Eleanor brushed dust from her skirts, trying to regain her composure. "Yes, I'm Eleanor James from Boston. How did you know?" "Small town," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Word travels. I'm Vincent Reed. Most folks call me Vince." Eleanor noticed the silver star pinned to his vest. "You're the sheriff?" "Deputy," he corrected, then gestured to her trunk, still sitting abandoned in the street. "Let me help you with that. The schoolhouse has living quarters attached. I can take you there." As they walked, Eleanor became acutely aware of the stares from the townspeople who had begun to emerge from the buildings along the main street. She'd known she would be an oddity in a frontier town, an educated Eastern woman, but the scrutiny made her uncomfortable nonetheless. "Don't mind them," Vince said quietly. "We don't get many new faces in Silver Creek, especially not." He trailed off. "Especially not unmarried women from the East?" Eleanor finished for him. He nodded, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Something like that." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple clapboard building with a small bell tower. Adjacent to it was a modest cabin that would serve as Eleanor's home. After helping her carry her trunk inside, Vince paused at the door. "Town council meeting is tomorrow evening. They'll want to meet you formally," he said. "Until then, if you need anything, my office is across from the general store." "Thank you, Deputy Reed," Eleanor replied. "I appreciate your assistance today." After he left, Eleanor sank onto the narrow bed, exhaustion washing over her. The cabin was sparse but clean, with a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. It was nothing like her father's comfortable home in Boston, but it was hers a fresh start. The next morning, Eleanor woke at dawn, determined to prepare for her first day of teaching. The school term wouldn't begin for another week, but she wanted to familiarize herself with the building and take inventory of supplies. She dressed in a simple blue cotton dress, pinned her chestnut hair into a practical bun, and headed to the schoolhouse. Inside, she found a single room with rows of rough-hewn desks, a larger desk at the front, and a blackboard mounted on the wall. Shelves held a meager collection of books, mostly well-worn McGuffey readers, and a few tattered arithmetic primers. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines, already making mental notes of what else she would need. Not much to work with, is it? Eleanor startled at the voice, turning to find a woman standing in the doorway. She appeared to be in her 40s, her blonde hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical knot. "I'm Martha Wilson," the woman said, stepping inside. "My husband owns the general store. I thought you might appreciate a proper welcome after yesterday's excitement." "That's very kind," Eleanor replied. "I'm Eleanor James." Martha nodded. "I know. News travels fast here." She set a basket on one of the desks. "I brought you some bread and preserves, and a bit of coffee. Figured you might not have had time to stock your pantry." "Thank you," Eleanor said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I confess I haven't had a chance to visit the store yet." "You'll find folks here are generally welcoming, despite how it might seem." Martha glanced around the schoolroom. "We haven't had a proper teacher in almost a year. The last one, a young man from Chicago, couldn't handle the isolation. Left before winter set in." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I assure you, Mrs. Wilson, I'm made of sterner stuff." Martha's expression softened. "I believe you are, Miss James, but don't be too proud to ask for help when you need it. Winters here can be brutal, and life on the frontier demands community." After Martha left, Eleanor continued her inventory. The teaching materials were woefully inadequate, but she'd brought some of her own books, and she was confident she could improvise. She had just finished organizing the small collection when the door opened again. This time it was a young girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, with red braids and a smattering of freckles across her nose. "Are you the new teacher?" the girl asked, peering at Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. "I am," Eleanor confirmed with a smile. "And who might you be?" "Lily Thompson," the girl replied. "Pa owns the livery stable." She stepped closer, examining Eleanor with frank assessment. "You're pretty. Our last teacher was old and had whiskers." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "Well, I can assure you I don't have whiskers, though I can't promise I won't grow old eventually." Lily nodded solemnly. "Will you teach us about the ocean?" "Mr. Farnsworth never would. But I heard you came from Boston, which is right on the sea." "I'd be happy to tell you about the ocean," Eleanor said. "Have you lived in Silver Creek all your life?" "Yes, madam. Never been farther than the county seat." Lily wandered around the classroom, trailing her fingers along the desks. "Pa says maybe someday we'll visit my aunt in Denver, but that's not the same as seeing the ocean." Eleanor watched the girl, struck by how different her childhood must be from the one she'd experienced in Boston, with its libraries, museums, and theaters. Here, the horizon seemed both more expansive and more limited. "The world is full of wonders, Lily," she said. "Books can take us places our feet may never tread." "That's what I told Pa," Lily exclaimed. "He says reading won't put food on the table, but I think it's important anyway." "Your father is right that practical skills are essential," Eleanor acknowledged. "But education feeds the mind and spirit. Both are necessary for a full life." The girl beamed at her. "I'm glad you're our teacher, Miss James." After Lily left, Eleanor continued working until the afternoon sun slanted through the windows. Her stomach reminded her that she hadn't eaten since the small breakfast she'd prepared that morning. Martha's basket of provisions beckoned, but Eleanor decided to venture into town instead, determined to familiarize herself with her new home. The main street of Silver Creek was less chaotic than it had been upon her arrival. She passed the general store, a barbershop, the Silver Nugget Saloon, and a small hotel before reaching the sheriff's office. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Vince Reed at his desk, head bent over paperwork. The general store proved to be a treasure trove of necessities and small luxuries. Martha Wilson greeted her warmly and introduced her to her husband, George, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes. They helped her select the essentials she would need, and George promised to deliver the heavier items to her cabin later that afternoon. "You'll be wanting to attend the town council meeting tonight," Martha reminded her as Eleanor prepared to leave. 7 o'clock at the town hall. It's the building next to the church. Eleanor nodded. "I'll be there. Thank you again for your kindness, Mrs. Wilson." "Martha, please," the woman insisted. "We're informal out here." As Eleanor walked back to her cabin, parcels in hand, she passed the livery stable. The sound of hammering drew her attention, and she paused to watch a man working on a wagon wheel. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscular forearms bronzed by the sun, and he worked with the confidence of someone who knew his craft well. "Afternoon, Miss James," he called, looking up from his work. "Settling in all right?" Surprised to be recognized, Eleanor approached the fence. "Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, have we met?" He chuckled, setting down his hammer. "No, madam, but like I said yesterday, word travels. Plus, my daughter Lily came home full of tales about the new teacher from Boston." "Ah, you're Mr. Thompson," Eleanor said, smiling. "Your daughter is delightful. She has a curious mind." "Too curious sometimes," he replied, but there was pride in his voice. "I'm Joshua Thompson. Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you. It seems like a lovely town, despite the excitement of my arrival." "The Callahan gang won't be back anytime soon," Joshua assured her. "Deputy Reed winged one of them pretty good. They'll be licking their wounds for a while." Eleanor nodded, not entirely comforted by this assessment. "I should get back to prepare for the council meeting tonight." "Don't let them intimidate you," Joshua advised, "particularly old Judge Harmon. He barks loud but doesn't bite much." With a wave of thanks, Eleanor continued to her cabin, reflecting on the people she'd met so far. Despite the rough exterior of the town, there seemed to be a strong sense of community. Perhaps she would find her place here after all. The town council meeting that evening proved to be an illuminating experience. The town hall was a modest building with wooden benches arranged in rows facing a raised platform where 5 men sat at a long table. Eleanor recognized George Wilson and spotted Vince Reed standing against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. The meeting began with routine business discussions about road repairs, complaints about cattle straying onto properties, and debates about funding for a new well. Eleanor listened attentively, getting a sense of the town's priorities and politics. Finally, Judge Harmon, a stern-faced man with a shock of white hair, called her name. "Miss James, would you please step forward?" Eleanor rose from her seat, conscious of all eyes upon her as she approached the front of the room. "Miss James comes to us highly recommended by her father's law partner, Mr. William Cabot, who some of you may recall visited our town last year on legal business," the judge announced. "She will be taking over our school, and we expect the citizens of Silver Creek to extend her every courtesy." Eleanor nodded her thanks, then cleared her throat. "If I may, I'd like to say a few words." Judge Harmon looked surprised but gestured for her to continue. "I understand that I am an outsider here," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "and that you may have reservations about entrusting your children's education to someone unfamiliar with frontier life. I assure you that what I lack in experience with your way of life, I make up for in dedication to education and a willingness to learn." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some appeared skeptical, others curious, a few openly welcoming. "The school's library is severely limited," she continued. "I've brought some of my own books, but I would welcome donations of any reading materials you might be willing to part with. Additionally, the building itself needs some repairs before winter. The roof leaks in several places, and 2 windows are cracked." "The town's budget is tight, Miss James," Judge Harmon interjected. We can't promise extensive renovations. I understand, Eleanor replied. Perhaps we could organize a community effort? I'm willing to contribute my own labor, and I imagine others might do the same for the benefit of the children. This suggestion caused a murmur of discussion among the townspeople. From his position against the wall, Vince Reed straightened and spoke for the first time. "Judge, if I may," he said, stepping forward. "Miss James makes a fair point. The schoolhouse has been neglected. I'll volunteer my time for repairs, and I suspect others will too." Several men nodded in agreement, including Joshua Thompson and George Wilson. "Very well," Judge Harmon conceded. "Mr. Wilson, would you coordinate this effort? Determine what materials we need and organize the labor." George nodded. "Happy to, Judge." With that settled, Eleanor returned to her seat, feeling a small sense of victory. The meeting continued for another half-hour before concluding, and as people began to file out, several parents approached her to introduce themselves and their children. As Eleanor was preparing to leave, Vince appeared at her side. "That was well done," he said quietly. "You've already won over half the town." "Only half?" she replied with a small smile. "The other half will come around when they see results," he assured her. "People out here judge by actions more than words." "A sensible approach," Eleanor acknowledged. "Thank you for supporting my request for repairs. It was the right thing to do." He hesitated, then added, "May I walk you back to your cabin? It's getting dark." Eleanor was about to decline, asserting her independence, but something in his expression stopped her. There was no condescension there, only genuine concern. "That would be kind, thank you," she said instead. As they walked through the twilight, the sounds of the town gradually faded behind them. The sky above was a canvas of deepening blue, stars beginning to emerge like silver pinpricks. "It's beautiful here," Eleanor observed. "Different from Boston, but beautiful in its own way." Vince nodded. "I came west after the war. Couldn't imagine going back east after seeing this country." "You fought in the war between the states?" Eleanor asked, glancing at him with new interest. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Came home to Pennsylvania to find my parents had died of influenza and the family farm sold for taxes. There was nothing left for me there." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "My father died last year. Pneumonia. That's why I came west. There was nothing keeping me in Boston, and I needed something new." They reached her cabin, and Eleanor paused at the steps. "Would you like to come in for coffee? It's the least I can offer after your help today." Vince hesitated, then shook his head. "Better not. People talk in small towns, and your reputation is important, especially as the schoolteacher." "Of course," Eleanor said, feeling foolish for not considering that. "You're right, but I appreciate the offer," he added with a gentle smile. "Perhaps another time in a more public setting." "Good night, Deputy Reed," Eleanor said, opening her door. "Good night, Miss James, and welcome to Silver Creek." The following days fell into a pattern as Eleanor prepared for the start of the school term. Each morning, she worked in the schoolhouse, organizing materials and developing lesson plans. In the afternoons, she explored the town and surrounding area, gradually becoming familiar with her new home. True to his word, George Wilson organized a work party to repair the schoolhouse. On Saturday morning, a dozen men arrived with tools and materials, ready to work. Eleanor provided coffee and the biscuits she'd baked that morning, earning appreciative comments from the volunteers. "These are mighty fine, Miss James," Joshua Thompson said, reaching for a second biscuit. "Didn't expect a city lady to know her way around a kitchen." "My mother died when I was young," Eleanor explained, pouring more coffee into his cup. "My father believed I should learn practical skills as well as academic ones." He hired our housekeeper to teach me cooking and sewing alongside my formal education. Smart man, Joshua commented. Too many Eastern girls come west knowing nothing useful. Eleanor suppressed a flicker of irritation at this generalization. I still have much to learn about frontier life, she acknowledged instead. But I'm willing to work hard and adapt. Throughout the day, she worked alongside the men, holding boards in place, fetching nails, and even taking a turn with a hammer when an extra hand was needed. By sunset, the roof was patched, the windows repaired, and the sagging front steps rebuilt. As the men began to pack up their tools, Vince approached Eleanor. He'd shed his vest and rolled up his sleeves hours ago, and a fine layer of sawdust covered his dark hair. You surprised a few folks today, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. How so? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Working alongside everyone instead of supervising from a distance. Not every woman would have been willing to get her hands dirty. Eleanor shrugged. It's my school. Why wouldn't I help? Vince studied her for a moment, a thoughtful expression on his face. Most of the town will be at the church social tomorrow after services. Will you attend? I plan to, Eleanor replied. Mrs. Wilson mentioned it earlier this week. Good. I'll see you there then. As he walked away, Eleanor realized she was smiling. There was something about Vince Reed that intrigued her, a quiet strength and decency that set him apart. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green muslin with delicate white piping, and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. The small mirror in her cabin reflected a woman she barely recognized, cheeks flushed with color from days spent partly outdoors, eyes bright with anticipation. The church service was well attended, with nearly the entire town present. Eleanor sat next to Martha Wilson, who introduced her to several people she hadn't yet met. After the service, tables were set up in the churchyard, laden with food brought by the townspeople. Eleanor had contributed a berry pie, using the last of the preserved berries Martha had given her. She felt a flutter of nervousness as she placed it among the other desserts, wondering how her Eastern cooking would compare to the frontier women's fare. Your first church social, a familiar voice said behind her. Eleanor turned to find Vince, looking different in his Sunday best, a clean dark suit and crisp white shirt, his hair neatly combed. It is, she admitted. We had similar gatherings in Boston, though perhaps more formal. Well, there's nothing formal about this, he replied with a smile. Just good food and company. The afternoon proved to be enjoyable. Eleanor met more of her future students and their parents, engaged in conversations about books with several townspeople who shared her love of reading, and was pleased when her pie disappeared quickly, with several compliments sent her way. As the afternoon waned, Vince found her again. Would you care to walk for a bit? He asked. There's a nice view from the hill behind the church. Eleanor glanced around, noting that many people were beginning to depart. I'd like that, she replied. They walked in comfortable silence up the gentle slope. At the top, Vince stopped, gesturing toward the panorama before them. Silver Creek lay spread out below, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. It's breathtaking, Eleanor said softly. This is why I stayed, Vince told her. I was just passing through 8 years ago. Took a job as a ranch hand for what I thought would be a season. But this view, he shook his head. Something about it spoke to me. I understand, Eleanor said. There's a vastness here that makes one feel both insignificant and somehow more alive. Vince looked at her with surprise. That's exactly it, he said. Most people don't understand when I try to explain. They stood in silence for a few moments, watching as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. May I ask you something, Miss James? Eleanor, please, she said. And yes, you may. Why did you really come west? Teaching positions must be plentiful in Boston. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. After my father died, I found myself at a crossroads. I could have married a colleague of his. He made an offer that was practical if not romantic. Or I could have lived with my aunt, helping to raise her children while gradually becoming the spinster relative everyone pitied. She paused, gazing at the horizon. Neither option appealed to me. When Mr. Cabot mentioned the position here, I saw it as a chance to define myself on my own terms, to discover who Eleanor James might be without the expectations of Boston society. That takes courage, Vince observed. Eleanor shook her head. Not really. Just desperation, perhaps. I'm nothing special, Deputy Reed. Just a woman seeking her place in the world. He turned to face her fully then, his blue eyes serious. I disagree. Not everyone would have the fortitude to leave everything familiar behind and start anew. And I've seen how you've approached this town with respect but also confidence. That's remarkable. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks at his words. You give me too much credit. I don't think so, he replied simply. But we should head back before people start to talk. The school term began the following day with 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Eleanor had organized them into 3 groups based on age and ability, and she moved between the groups throughout the day, assigning work to one while instructing another. By the end of the first week, she had developed a good sense of each child's strengths and weaknesses. Lily Thompson proved to be exceptionally bright, devouring books beyond her years. The Cooper twins, at 16, were in their final year of schooling and showed particular aptitude for mathematics. Young Tommy Wilson, Martha's grandson, struggled with reading, but displayed a remarkable memory for facts once he heard them. Eleanor found herself enjoying the challenges of teaching in a one-room schoolhouse. It required creativity and flexibility, but there was a satisfaction in seeing the children's progress that she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon in late September, as the students were filing out at the end of the day, Vince appeared at the schoolhouse door. Deputy Reed. Eleanor greeted him, surprised. Is everything all right? Fine, he assured her. I was wondering if you might like to join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening? Mrs. Peterson is serving her famous venison stew. Eleanor blinked at the unexpected invitation. Yes, I'd like that. What time? 6 o'clock? I can meet you there. That would be lovely, she replied, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the flutter in her chest. After he left, Eleanor rushed back to her cabin to change. She selected a blue dress she hadn't worn since arriving in Silver Creek and spent extra time arranging her hair. As she fastened a simple silver brooch at her throat, a gift from her father on her 18th birthday, she caught herself smiling at her reflection. Don't be foolish, she muttered to herself. It's just dinner. But as she walked to the hotel, Eleanor couldn't deny the anticipation she felt. Since arriving in Silver Creek, Vince had been consistently kind and helpful, and she'd found herself looking forward to their brief encounters. The hotel restaurant was the most elegant establishment in town, though it would have been considered modest in Boston. Tables covered with white cloths were arranged around a central fireplace, and oil lamps cast a warm glow over the room. Vince was waiting for her, standing as she approached. You look lovely, he said simply. Thank you, Eleanor replied, taking the seat he held for her. I haven't had a chance to dine here yet. Mrs. Peterson is a fine cook, Vince told her. Her husband was a hotel chef in St. Louis before they came west. He died in a mining accident 5 years ago, but she kept the restaurant going. Throughout dinner, their conversation flowed easily. Eleanor told him more about her life in Boston, her father's law practice, and her own education. Vince shared stories of his time in the cavalry and his journey west after the war. "I wandered for a while," he admitted. "Worked as a ranch hand, did some scouting for the army, even tried my hand at prospecting. Nothing felt right until I came to Silver Creek." "And how did you become a deputy?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "The previous sheriff noticed I had a knack for keeping my head in tense situations," Vince explained. "After I broke up a particularly nasty fight at the saloon without firing a shot, he offered me the job. Said he was getting too old to wrestle drunken cowboys to the ground." "You seem well suited to it," Eleanor observed. "The townspeople respect you." "Most of them," Vince agreed with a wry smile, "though the Callahan gang might disagree." After dinner, Vince walked Eleanor back to her cabin. The night was clear, stars blanketing the sky above them. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Eleanor said as they reached her door. "The pleasure was mine," Vince replied. He hesitated, then added, "I've enjoyed getting to know you, Eleanor. I hope we can do this again." "I'd like that," she said softly. For a moment it seemed he might say more, but instead he tipped his hat. "Good night, then." "Good night, Vince." As she prepared for bed that night, Eleanor reflected on how quickly Silver Creek had begun to feel like home. In just a few weeks, she'd established routines, formed friendships, and found purpose in her teaching. And then there was Vince Reed, whose company she found herself craving in a way that both excited and frightened her. October brought cooler weather and the vibrant colors of autumn to the mountains surrounding Silver Creek. Eleanor's students were progressing well, and she had started an evening class twice a week for adults who wished to improve their reading or arithmetic skills. To her surprise, several ranch hands and miners attended regularly, along with a few townswomen who had never had the opportunity for formal education. One Tuesday evening, as Eleanor was dismissing her adult students, Joshua Thompson lingered behind. "Miss James, I wonder if I might ask a favor," he said, turning his hat in his hands. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. What can I do for you?" "It's Lily's birthday next week," he explained. "She'll be 11. I want to get her something special, but I'm at a loss. She keeps talking about books you've mentioned in class, stories about far-off places and such." Eleanor smiled, touched by his concern for his daughter's interests. "Lily is particularly fascinated by exploration and geography. I have a book of maps and accounts of famous expeditions that I think she would love." "I'd be happy to part with it." Joshua shook his head firmly. "I appreciate that, but I want to buy her a gift proper. Is there something I could order from the catalog at the general store?" "Let me think," Eleanor said, considering the options. "There's a wonderful illustrated edition of Robinson Crusoe that I believe she would enjoy. It has beautiful engravings of tropical islands and sailing ships." "That sounds perfect," Joshua said, relief evident in his voice. "Would you help me order it? I'm not much for writing out such things." "I'd be happy to," Eleanor assured him. "We can go to the general store tomorrow after school lets out, if that suits you." The next day, after helping Joshua place the order for Lily's book, Eleanor decided to stop by the sheriff's office. She hadn't seen Vince in several days, as he'd been out of town tracking cattle rustlers. The office was empty except for Sheriff Hollister, an older man with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. "Afternoon, Miss James," he greeted her. "Looking for my deputy, I reckon?" "Yes," Eleanor admitted. "I heard he was back in town." "He is indeed," Sheriff Hollister confirmed. "Gone to get a hot meal at the hotel. Said something about trail rations getting tiresome after 4 days." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "I won't disturb his meal. Would you tell him I stopped by?" "Course I will," the sheriff replied with a knowing smile that made Eleanor's cheeks warm. As she turned to leave, the door opened, and Vince entered. He looked tired, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw, but his face brightened when he saw her. "Eleanor," he said, "I was going to stop by the schoolhouse later." "I heard you were back," she replied. "I wanted to make sure you returned safely." Sheriff Hollister cleared his throat pointedly. "Think I'll go check on that disturbance over at the smithy," he announced, though Eleanor had heard no commotion. He grabbed his hat and stepped outside, leaving them alone. "Subtle as a stampede, that man," Vince muttered, shaking his head. Then, more seriously, "It's good to see you." "Did you find the rustlers?" Eleanor asked. "We did. Two young fools who thought stealing cattle was easier than honest work. They're cooling their heels in the county jail now." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I was about to get cleaned up. Would you like to take a ride with me later? There's a place I'd like to show you, if you're not busy with your evening class." "No class tonight," Eleanor told him. "And yes, I'd enjoy that. I'll come by your cabin at 4, then," Vince said, a smile warming his tired eyes. True to his word, Vince arrived at Eleanor's cabin promptly at 4 o'clock, leading 2 horses. He had shaved and changed into clean clothes, though Eleanor noted he still wore his gun belt and badge. "Do you ever truly stop being a deputy?" she asked as he helped her mount the gentle mare he'd brought for her. "Not really," he admitted, swinging into his own saddle. "The badge comes off, but the responsibility doesn't." They rode out of town, following a trail that wound through golden aspen groves and stands of pine. The afternoon sun bathed the landscape in warm light, and Eleanor found herself relaxing in the saddle, enjoying the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her. After about 30 minutes, they crested a hill, and Vince reined in his mount. "Here we are," he said. Eleanor gasped at the view before her. A small lake nestled in a natural bowl, its surface reflecting the surrounding mountains and trees. The shoreline was rimmed with aspens, their yellow leaves quivering in the gentle breeze. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Vince dismounted and helped Eleanor down from her horse. They led the animals to the edge of the lake, where they could drink. Then Vince spread a blanket on a patch of grass. "I discovered this place my first year here," he told her as they sat. "I come when I need to think, or just to remind myself why I stayed." "Thank you for sharing it with me," Eleanor said softly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the lake. "I've been meaning to ask," Vince said eventually. "Are you happy here, Eleanor? In Silver Creek?" She considered the question carefully. "Yes," she replied. "More than I expected to be. The teaching is challenging but rewarding, and the people have been kinder than I anticipated." "Even with the town gossips watching your every move?" Vince asked with a wry smile. "Even so," Eleanor confirmed. "In Boston, I was always Charles James's daughter, defined by my father's position and reputation. Here, I'm simply Miss James, the schoolteacher. There's a freedom in that I never experienced before." Vince nodded in understanding. "I felt something similar when I came west. In Pennsylvania, I was Vincent Reed, son of John Reed, grandson of William Reed. Here, I could define myself by my own actions." "Exactly," Eleanor said, pleased that he understood. "Though I sometimes miss certain comforts of city life, libraries, theaters, bookshops. And proper tea, I imagine," Vince added with a smile. "Martha Wilson mentioned you've been teaching her to brew it correctly." Eleanor laughed. "She's a willing student, at least, and she's teaching me to make proper biscuits in return." As the sun dipped lower, casting orange and pink hues across the sky, Vince turned to face Eleanor more directly. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you," he said, his expression serious. "The reason I invited you here today." Eleanor's heart quickened. Yes. The sheriff is retiring at the end of the year. He's recommended me to the town council as his replacement. Vince, that's wonderful news, Eleanor exclaimed. Congratulations. Thank you, he said. The council will vote next month. But Hollister thinks it's certain. It would mean more responsibility, of course, but also more stability. The way he emphasized the last word made Eleanor wonder if there was more meaning behind it than was immediately apparent. I'm very happy for you, she said. Silver Creek is fortunate to have you. Vince reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a warmth up her arm. Eleanor, I know you've only been here a short time, and I don't want to rush you, but I've come to care for you deeply. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Vince, You don't need to say anything now, he interrupted gently. I just wanted you to know, and to ask if you might consider courtship, proper and respectable, of course. Relief and joy flooded through Eleanor. I'd like that very much, she replied, squeezing his hand. I've come to care for you too. The smile that spread across Vince's face made her heart soar. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste, but it left Eleanor feeling as though she'd been touched by a flame. As they rode back to town in the gathering dusk, Eleanor felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead might not be clear, but for the first time since her father's death, she felt hopeful about the future. The following weeks seemed to fly by as autumn deepened toward winter. Eleanor's days were filled with teaching, while her evenings often included Vince's company. They attended church socials together, shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and occasionally rode to the lake on Sunday afternoons when the weather permitted. Their courtship was conducted with proper decorum, mindful of Eleanor's position as the town's teacher and Vince's role as deputy. Nevertheless, it didn't take long for the townspeople to notice the attachment forming between them. It's good to see the deputy smiling more, Martha Wilson remarked one afternoon as Eleanor selected fabric for new curtains at the general store. He's been alone too long. Has he never courted anyone in town before? Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. Martha shook her head. Not seriously. There was some talk about him and the widow Carson a few years back, but nothing came of it. She held up a bolt of checked gingham. This would suit your kitchen window nicely. Eleanor agreed and added it to her purchases, but her mind was on Martha's words. She knew so little about Vince's past relationships, she realized. It hadn't seemed important before, but now she found herself curious. That evening, as they walked after dinner, Eleanor gathered her courage to ask. Martha mentioned a widow Carson today, she began cautiously. She implied there might have been something between you once. Vince was quiet for a moment, then sighed. Sarah Carson. Her husband was killed in a mining accident about 4 years ago. We did court briefly, about a year after his death. What happened? Eleanor asked softly. She wanted to return to Ohio to her family, Vince explained. I couldn't leave Silver Creek. We parted amicably, and she moved east with her children the following spring. I see, Eleanor said, relief mingling with sympathy. I'm sorry it didn't work out. Vince stopped walking and turned to face her. I'm not, he said simply. If it had, I wouldn't be here with you now. The sincerity in his voice made Eleanor's heart skip. Vince, she began, but words failed her. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering on her cheek. I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Eleanor. I want you to know that. Before she could respond, a shout from down the street interrupted them. They turned to see a young boy running toward them, his face pale in the gathering darkness. Deputy Reed, the boy called. Pa sent me to fetch you. There's trouble at the saloon. Vince's expression shifted instantly from tender to alert. "Stay here," he told Eleanor, then strode toward the commotion, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his revolver. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before following at a distance. As she neared the Silver Nugget Saloon, she could hear raised voices and the sound of breaking glass. A crowd had gathered outside, and she pushed through to the front just as a gunshot rang out. Time seemed to slow as Eleanor saw Vince stagger backward, his hand pressed to his side. Without thinking, she rushed forward as he sank to his knees. "Vince!" she cried, reaching his side just as Sheriff Hollister and two townsmen subdued the shooter, a wild-eyed man Eleanor didn't recognize. "It's not bad," Vince grimaced, his hand coming away from his side stained with blood. "Grazed me, I think." "Let me see," Eleanor demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. She had helped her father tend wounded soldiers during the war when she was just a girl, and those long-ago lessons came back to her now. The wound was indeed a graze, deep but not life-threatening. "We need to get him to the doctor," she announced to the gathering crowd. Two men helped Vince to his feet, supporting him as they made their way to Dr. Phillips's house at the end of the street. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding with fear and relief. The doctor confirmed Eleanor's assessment. The bullet had carved a furrow along Vince's ribs but hadn't penetrated his chest. After cleaning and bandaging the wound, Dr. Phillips insisted Vince remain overnight for observation. "You were lucky, Deputy," the doctor said sternly. "An inch to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation." When they were alone, Eleanor took Vince's hand, unable to stop the tears that had been threatening since the shot was fired. "I'm all right," Vince assured her, squeezing her fingers. "Hazard of the job." "You could have been killed," Eleanor whispered. "But I wasn't," he replied gently. "Don't dwell on what might have happened." Eleanor wiped her eyes, drawing a deep breath. "Who was that man? I didn't recognize him." "Drifter," Vince explained. "Been causing trouble for a few days. Hollister and I were planning to run him out of town tomorrow if he didn't move on. Guess he decided to make his mark before leaving." "Will he hang?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the harshness of the question. Vince shook his head. "For shooting a lawman? He'll do time but not hang. If he'd killed me, that would be different." The casual way he discussed his potential death sent a chill through Eleanor. She had known, of course, that being a lawman in a frontier town was dangerous, but the reality of it had never struck her so forcefully until now. "You should go home," Vince told her, noticing her distress. "I'll be fine, and you have school tomorrow." "I'll leave soon," Eleanor promised, though she made no move to release his hand. Dr. Phillips returned a few minutes later with a cup of medicinal tea for Vince. "This will help with the pain and let you sleep," he explained. "Miss James, I must insist you let my patient rest now." Reluctantly, Eleanor stood. "I'll come by in the morning before school," she told Vince. "I'll be here," he replied with a tired smile. The walk back to her cabin in the darkness gave Eleanor time to think. The evening's events had clarified something she had been feeling for weeks but had been hesitant to admit even to herself. She loved Vince Reed. The thought of losing him had made that crystal clear. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Eleanor had never expected to find love in this remote frontier town. Yet here it was, as undeniable as the stars above her. Vince recovered quickly from his wound, though Dr. Phillips insisted he limit his duties for a week to allow proper healing. The incident seemed to accelerate their courtship, as if both had been reminded of life's uncertainty. By mid-November, when the first snows dusted the mountains, Vince and Eleanor's attachment was common knowledge in Silver Creek. They attended church together each Sunday, and Vince often accompanied Eleanor on her errands around town. They maintained propriety, always meeting in public places or at Eleanor's cabin with the door left open, but there was no hiding the deepening bond between them. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire in Eleanor's cabin after dinner, Vince broached a subject they had danced around for weeks. "The town council confirmed my appointment as sheriff yesterday," he said, watching the flames rather than meeting her eyes. "I'll take over officially on the 1st of January. "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said, genuinely pleased for him. "I never doubted they would choose you." Vince nodded, still staring into the fire. "It means a higher salary. More responsibility, of course, but also more stability." "You mentioned that before," Eleanor noted, her heart beginning to race as she sensed what might be coming. Finally, Vince turned to look at her. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about the future. Our future, if you'll have me." "Vince?" she breathed, hardly daring to hope. He moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Eleanor James. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, but I'm certain of my feelings, and I hope you might consider becoming my wife." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Vince, I will marry you." His face lit with such happiness that Eleanor felt her heart might burst. He cupped her face gently and kissed her, a kiss filled with promise and tenderness. When they parted, Vince reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small pearl. "I've kept it all these years, hoping someday to give it to the woman I would marry." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor was struck by the journey that had brought her to this moment, from her father's death in Boston to this cabin in Silver Creek, to the love of a man she would never have met had her life proceeded as expected. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring the way the pearl gleamed in the firelight. "And it fits perfectly." "Like you in my life," Vince replied, and though the words might have seemed overly sentimental from another man, from him they rang with simple truth. They decided to marry after Christmas, when the school term ended for the winter break. Martha Wilson immediately took charge of the preparations, declaring that the new sheriff and the schoolteacher deserved a proper wedding, frontier style. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the town, met with general approval and a few good-natured remarks about how the schoolmarm had managed to tame the deputy faster than he'd tamed the Callahan gang. As the wedding date approached, Eleanor wrote to her aunt in Boston, sharing her news and extending an invitation that she knew would likely be declined due to the winter travel conditions. To her surprise, Aunt Harriet replied with genuine good wishes and a promise to visit in the spring, along with a package containing a length of fine lace for a wedding veil. "She seems to have accepted my decision to remain in the West," Eleanor told Vince as they read the letter together. "That's a relief. She was quite opposed to my coming here initially." "She was concerned for your welfare," Vince observed. "That's understandable. But I think she'll find you've done well for yourself when she visits." "I have, haven't I?" Eleanor mused, looking around at the simple cabin that had become her home. "It's nothing like the life I expected, but I wouldn't change it. Not even for libraries and theaters?" Vince teased gently. "Not even for those," Eleanor confirmed, "though I still plan to establish a proper town library someday. Silver Creek's children deserve access to books. If anyone can make that happen, it's you," Vince said with conviction. "And as sheriff, I'll support your efforts however I can." December brought heavy snows and bitter cold, but preparations for the wedding continued. The women of the town gathered at Martha's house for a sewing circle, working on a wedding quilt for the couple while sharing advice and stories that made Eleanor blush to the roots of her hair. "Don't pay them too much mind," Martha told her quietly as the other women debated the merits of various nightgown styles. Just remember that love makes everything easier, even the intimate aspects of marriage." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the older woman's kindness. "I admit I'm nervous," she confessed. "Not about loving Vince, but about being a good wife. My mother died when I was young, so I never had her guidance." "You'll learn together," Martha assured her. "And you're already skilled at managing a household and teaching children. Being a wife isn't so different. It requires patience, communication, and a willingness to compromise." The wedding was set for December 27th, allowing time for celebration between Christmas and the New Year. As the day approached, Eleanor found herself filled with both excitement and a strange melancholy. She wished her father could have met Vince, could have seen her happiness in this new life. On Christmas Eve, a snowstorm blanketed Silver Creek in fresh white powder. By morning, the town looked like an illustration from a children's book, with smoke curling from chimneys and evergreen boughs heavy with snow. Eleanor and Vince exchanged gifts after the church service. She had knitted him a warm scarf in dark blue wool, and he presented her with a beautifully bound edition of Shakespeare's sonnets that he'd ordered from Denver months earlier. "I remember you mentioning your father used to read them to you," Vince said as she traced the gold lettering on the cover. "I thought you might like to have them here." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." 2 days later, on their wedding day, the sun shone brilliantly on the snow-covered landscape. Martha and several other women helped Eleanor dress in her finest gown, altered slightly for the occasion with the addition of Aunt Harriet's lace as a modest veil. "You look beautiful," Martha declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Vince won't know what hit him. The church was filled to capacity, with nearly every resident of Silver Creek in attendance. As Eleanor walked down the aisle on Joshua Thompson's arm, he had offered to give her away, knowing her father was gone. She saw only Vince waiting for her at the altar, his eyes shining with love. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Reverend Simmons guiding them through their vows. When Vince slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, Eleanor felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend announced. "You may kiss your bride." Vince's kiss was gentle and reverent, mindful of their audience but conveying a depth of feeling that made Eleanor's heart soar. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, transformed by the women of Silver Creek into a festive space with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. There was abundant food, music provided by local fiddle players, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As they danced, Eleanor caught glimpses of the life they would build together, the respect in Sheriff Hollister's congratulatory handshake, the affection in Martha's motherly hug, the acceptance in the community's celebration of their union. "Happy, Mrs. Reed?" Vince murmured as they swayed to a slow melody. "Very," Eleanor replied, savoring the new name. "And you, Sheriff Reed?" "More than I ever thought possible," he told her, his arms tightening around her waist. "I never expected to find someone like you in Silver Creek." "I'm nothing special," Eleanor said, echoing words she had spoken to him months earlier on the hill overlooking the town. Vince stopped dancing and looked down at her, his expression serious. "You're everything to me," he said simply. "Everything, Eleanor." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "And you to me," she whispered. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and they retired to Vince's house, their house, now Eleanor stood by the bedroom window, looking out at the star-filled sky. Vince came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "About journeys," she replied. "How the path that seemed so bleak after my father died led me here. To you, to this life I never imagined but now can't imagine being without." Vince turned her gently to face him. I believe some journeys are meant to be, Eleanor, like mine leading west, and yours bringing you to Silver Creek. As he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and passion, Eleanor knew he was right. Their separate journeys had converged in this remote frontier town, creating a new path they would walk together. 5 years later, Eleanor stood on the porch of their expanded home at the edge of town, watching as Vince taught their 4-year-old son, Charles, to ride his new pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, played contentedly at Eleanor's feet, arranging pine cones in patterns only she understood. Silver Creek had grown in those years, with new businesses and homes springing up as the railroad had finally reached the town. The school now had 2 teachers, Eleanor, who taught the older students, and a young woman from Denver who handled the younger children. Eleanor's dream of a town library had been realized as well, housed in a small building next to the schoolhouse and stocked with books donated by townspeople and ordered from the east. Vince had built the shelves himself, working evenings after his sheriff's duties were done. Their life wasn't always easy. Frontier existence never was. There had been harsh winters, illness, and the constant challenges of Vince's dangerous profession. Just last year, he'd been seriously injured while apprehending a bank robber, leaving Eleanor to run the household and care for the children while also nursing him back to health. But through it all, their love had only deepened, becoming the foundation upon which everything else in their lives was built. They had found in each other not just passion and companionship, but a true partnership supporting each other's dreams, sharing burdens, and celebrating joys. As Vince helped Charles dismount and the boy ran toward her with excitement shining in his eyes, Vince's eyes, in a face that otherwise favored Eleanor, she felt a surge of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her west. "Mama, did you see?" Charles called. "I rode all by myself." "I saw, darling," Eleanor assured him, ruffling his dark hair. "You were very brave." Vince followed more slowly, scooping up Sarah as he reached the porch. She giggled and patted his cheeks with her small hands. "What do you think?" he asked Eleanor, nodding toward Charles, who was already describing his adventure to his little sister. "Will he be ready to ride to school in a year or 2? "Perhaps," Eleanor allowed, "though I may need that long to prepare myself for the idea." Vince laughed, the sound as warming to Eleanor as it had been the first time she heard it. "You'll be ready," he assured her. "You're the strongest woman I know." "Only because I have you beside me," she replied. He leaned down to kiss her lightly, mindful of the child in his arms. "Always," he promised. "Always." As the setting sun cast golden light across their home and family, Eleanor reflected on the words she had once spoken to Vince. "I'm nothing special." How wrong she had been. In his eyes, in their children's love, in the life they had built together, she had found her true worth. And in the wild expanse of the western frontier, so different from the ordered society she had left behind, Eleanor Reed had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected journeys led to the most perfect destinations.